Welcome to Virtual Face to Face. I'm Alex Lukowski, AVP of Communications. Rather than jumping over someone to get what you want, consider reaching out your hand and taking the leap side by side because life is better when we leap together. Kermit the Frog's message to the University of Maryland College Park grads last month could not have been more timely, not just for grads getting ready to leap into society, but also their universities, which face a truly unprecedented array of challenges. Research, diversity and inclusion, international students, student finance all now face the prospect of dramatic change under federal government policy. Now, 6 months ago, everything was coming up roses for our universities at College Park and in Baltimore. Our university gives us so many reasons to be proud, wrote UMCP President Darryll Pines. Internationally ranked academic programs, amazing artists and groundbreaking researchers, award-winning faculty, extraordinary and caring staff. Together, we are channeling our collective excellence to take on the grand challenges of our time. Even in light of the many challenges imposed by the new administration, that is all still happening and in a big way. Topping the list at Maryland's flagship university right now are two very big things that are increasingly connected: quantum and AI. Just over a year ago, the university launched the Artificial Intelligence Interdisciplinary Institute at Maryland, or AIM. We love acronyms, offering teaching, learning, and innovation opportunities, building on over 100 faculty members who teach AI there. Now, at a recent meeting, President Pines told Lieutenant Governor Aruna Miller and leaders from chipmaker NVIDIA, when it comes to AI, he's all in. And then there's quantum. Now, we're not talking about Planck's constant or Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. That's quantum mechanics, and that is so last century. Now, today's quantum is being called a seismic shift in computing, where computers today use electrical signals to create ones and zeros to represent data. Quantum computing uses quantum bits, subatomic particles, which at that very basic level exhibit very peculiar and very useful particle and wave characteristics. As a result, quantum computing may be able to tackle far more complicated problems, like modeling complex biochemical reactions and revolutionizing everything from meteorology to metal science. In April, Governor Wes Moore and leaders from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, joined President Pines to create the Capital Quantum Benchmarking Hub, a cooperative effort dedicated to testing and evaluating quantum computing prototypes and systems for national security and commercial applications, based, of course, in College Park. There are also big collaborations taking place between Baltimore and College Park, many but not all, part of the University of Maryland's strategic partnership Empowering the State. The idea is for researchers from different disciplines to link up and collaborate to tackle challenges neither one could do alone. And it's working. More about some of those in a bit. But of course, for the last several years, the two universities have also coordinated and reported research activities as one. Together, the University of Maryland now ranks 18th among all U.S. institutions in research expenditures and 11th among public institutions. The latest report for fiscal year 2023 shows $1.4 billion in research spending, an increase of $157 million from the previous year. But this year is different and difficult on several fronts. Starting with research, dozens of grants at both institutions have been cut, most ostensibly for failing to meet changing administration priorities or because the grants are related somehow to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Federal grant-making agencies have also said they're cutting reimbursement for facilities and administration costs, or indirect costs, by more than 2/3 from currently negotiated rates. At the same time, approvals for new grants and extensions for ongoing projects have slowed to a trickle. Another common concern is the status of international students. Last month, the State Department announced it would aggressively revoke the visas of Chinese students. 2 weeks ago, a preliminary trade deal with China seems to have reversed that. In the meantime, a travel ban has been imposed, restricting travel from 19 countries, and reports say that number could go as high as 55. At the very least, it's a nerve-wracking time to be an international student here in the U.S. Domestic students are facing their own issues. The One Big Beautiful Reconciliation Bill, now being modified by the Senate, originally included a cut of nearly $350 billion to student finance, including cuts to Pell Grants and a phase out of the Grad Plus loan program. But things are evolving, hopefully, in a good direction. It has not, however, all been doom and gloom. Court challenges have put the brakes, for now, on many of the suddenly imposed cuts. For example, last week, a federal judge ordered NIH to restore some 800 canceled grants for studies on topics like diversity and transgender issues. There are hundreds more legal challenges waiting decisions, including Harvard's suit to reclaim some $2 billion in federal funds. Both UMB and UMCP joined 16 other universities this month in an amicus brief to that suit. So there's a lot going on, as I say. Joining us today are the leaders of our two universities. You know, of course, our own president, Bruce Jarrell. We're very happy to also have with us Maryland's top terp, University of Maryland College Park President Darryll Pines. Now, later in the program, you'll have a chance to ask your own questions. Please write them in the Q&A area. And let me know if you want to speak up, have me read your question, or remain anonymous. All those options are fine. We decided today to let the two of you start off with a few words about what's top of mind. So, President Pines, you are our guest. What do you say?
Well, good morning, everyone, and good morning, Alex. Thank you for having this face-to-face. It's an honor and privilege to be here with my colleague, President Jarrell. You think at the top of mind, based on what you just summarized, would be immigration, graduate students, research, F&A rates, which would be top of mind. But actually, what's top of mind for me is why didn't Derek Queen go in the top 10 of the NBA draft last night? He went number 13. So
Doesn't
I'm
make
very
sense.
excited for him and his family, and very excited for our Maryland Terrapin community that he was still a lottery pick, and he'll go to the New Orleans Pelicans. That's actually what at the top of my mind from the last 12 hours or so. And I
That's why
also
you're
want
the
to
top
tell
terp, by the way, right?
he's the top Terp for the last 24 hours. And I just want to tell everyone that the Big Ten had 8 first round draftees last night, and that's double more than any of the other conferences, if you are keeping count, and I'm keeping count. But really, on a more serious note, first thanks for the great summary of the conditions that we face in higher education. Obviously, this is a difficult time period, but I think both institutions, faculty and staff and students at both institutions, really should take this moment in the summer to take some time to take a deep breath and reflect, and that in every crisis, as President Jarrell and I always talk about, there's an opportunity for real opportunities to reimagine ourselves. And it just reminds me of when we as institutions in higher education were in COVID, and the University System of Maryland brought all 12 institutions together, and UMB was the lead institution in almost everything related to testing, vaccine development as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And what it did was, in that moment of uncertainty, crisis, chaos, um, we came together and we charted a path for how we would come online in the fall of 2020. All of our institutions, led by UMB and the School of Medicine and the Institute for Genomics, and other institutes here at UMB. And but it actually bridged gaps in many other ways that we couldn't even have imagined, that we got to understand our institutions a little bit more and what their strengths and weaknesses were. So here we are again, 5 years later, under a new administration, where almost every part of what we do is being challenged. And the perspective from College Park has been to do sort of 4 things. Number one, to pursue advocacy, both at the state and federal level, so that they understand the value of higher education and our research and our educational missions. Number two, in partnership with UMB and the USM and the state's Attorney General's office, to challenge things that we think are not legal when we get an executive order or a dear colleague letter. So first, advocacy. Second, challenge in the court system. Number three, adapt and pivot to new models and new ways of thinking to ensure that our universities are more resilient going forward. And then number four, to try our best to inform our communities that we've invested in, should make sure they understand that we, the leadership of our 2 institutions, are working together on these complex problems, and that we are trying to do our best to keep everyone informed and to make sure that we are transparent and that we are working urgently on these issues to make sure the situation is better for our two institutions. Thank you.
All right, Bruce.
Greetings to all, and you see why we have such a great partner, because what Darryll said is certainly the same kinds of things that I would say here, except that our basketball team is undefeated, sir. Just wanted you to know that. We haven't lost a game in years, which is kind of nice. I thought maybe what I would talk about, which is what's on my mind, has to do with research. And you heard Alex mention earlier about our ranking in the National Science Foundation Higher Education Research and Development metrics. What Alex didn't say, and I expected President Pines to say, was this year we're at $1.54 billion expenditures, which should certainly put us in the top 10 of public universities. I have to say, I get great pride in that we're actually in those ranks, and reporting together has had a remarkable, I think, effect on how we're viewed in the world. But let me focus on UMB for a minute. I know that all of you in the audience think of UMB as a heavy research institution, and from my broad point of view, I would say we're heavy in biomedical research. We're also heavy in social sciences and legal research, and I've learned that legal scholarship and social science scholarships are very, very important as well for not only the health of individuals, but for the health of our country. I think, though, what I want to focus on in terms of what I consider to be the biggest concern for me has to do with human health. And any of you who have been in a lab know the tour de force that's necessary to have a well-functioning biomedical research lab. It requires really skilled thinkers, people to write grants, skilled technicians and other faculty to execute the grant, and very sophisticated resources, instruments, facilities, connection to high-end computing, et cetera. And then once you get past the basic part, you've got to translate this to clinical part. And so to do clinical trials requires an equally complicated clinical apparatus to be able to do these properly. And the fuel that's made all of this go over the last 70 to 80 years is the National Institute of Health. And we really have very well documented this concept of from bench to bedside to bench, and to have a cycle there, a virtuous cycle that feeds on itself and makes the science even better. So the US is known as the premier biomedical research place in the world, and it's because of the National Institute of Health and the compact that they have with each of the research universities to get this thing done. But the kind of thing that I'm concerned is that right now that NIH engine that improves human health has faltered. And somehow we've not conveyed properly to the US population just how important this biomedical enterprise is, and what is the impact of a pause. Even though we don't know how long this is going to go, right now it's uncertain. And there are those at the federal level who somehow don't quite see this as a problem. And I see this as a big, big, big problem. I do not agree with that. And I thought just for fun, I would give you two examples at UMB that I think exemplify what's at risk here. Now, the first, President Pines already mentioned, so I'm going to go to that one first. That was going to be my second, and it was COVID. And I know every one of you on this call remember COVID. In my mind, it was a miracle, totally a miracle, the rapid development of the mRNA vaccines. And you may know that the Center for Vaccine Development here at UMB was critical in the testing of those vaccines. I was in the Moderna trial. We also did the Pfizer trial. These were important things that took years of NIH funding to develop, not just the vaccine, but the apparatus to test the vaccine in our CVD. And as the President Pines mentioned, our genomics center turned on a dime to go from a deep, high functioning research center to a clinical testing center overnight because our nation needed it. So what's at risk with that sort of group of things? What's at risk there is the ability of our country to respond to public health crises. And I assure you, another one will occur, and another, and another. And the more sophisticated our response is, the better we will do with all of that. The other thing that just strikes me so odd, and I just read an article about this, is that in the now current clinical environment, mRNA technology is being questioned. Is it worthy of NIH funding? Now, I have to say to all of you, seriously? You're asking that question when it really revolutionized the care of COVID? So, and of course, there's a lot of discussion about how that technology will apply to cancer therapy, et cetera, et cetera. Wait a minute, I don't want that to get lost in this political environment. That's really, really important to me. So that's one example I want to give to you. The other example that I want to give to you is about breast cancer. And I bet you everybody on this call knows somebody with breast cancer and knows somebody who's struggling with it or somebody who's gotten a remarkable recovery from it, which I hope the latter is usually the case. So you may know that in this university, UMB, there was an investigator, Angela Brody, who really discovered the aromatase inhibitors right here at UMB. Now, I have to tell you, I knew her in the earlier days, and even before I got here, I knew the story. And this was a researcher who was in a lab. She had an idea about how to block estrogen, but she didn't have the support of the NIH. She couldn't get funding, but she had another important piece of support. She had the support of a university to provide her support and of a chair who said, wait a minute, I think this is important. I stand behind you. And I think you know that the story of aromatase inhibitors are an extremely successful therapy for breast cancer in this country, in this world. The estimate is that it reduces the chance of dying in certain breast cancer patients by 40% at 10 years. I'll take that. That's a remarkable improvement. And it's a $5.4 billion industry. So also to point out to you that this biomedical research is not just about individual health, it's also about the economic health of this country. So do I see that at risk too? I do. I see the risk of discovering drugs like this, innovative treatments that don't immediately appear like they're going to be the future, but yet they pan out in really remarkable thing. And I think that every human in this country cares about cancer. So, Alex, that's what's been on my mind. We have to protect those kinds of things. That's my mission right now.
But before we go any farther, I want to point out Alexandra Squires wrote in the Q&A that Angela Brody's discovery saved my life. I had ovarian cancer and aromatase inhibitors saved my life. I'm a 4-year survivor and I'm 39 years old. That's fantastic. And I will just say that my mother also had aromatase treatment and for her breast cancer. She's passed since, but was very successful. And so I know exactly what you're talking about. And I'm sure there are plenty of other people who feel that way. Just a gut check. One thing I know about the two of you is you're both engineers at heart. And, I know you're a surgeon, Dr. Jarrell, but that's kind of an engineer, right? I mean, it's a human body engineer. And engineers tend to have this point of view, I think, that everything has a solution, can be fixed. You have to analyze it, come to the solution. It's kind of an optimistic approach, I think, to facing problems. Do you feel optimistic right now? I mean, Darryll, do you feel optimistic about our current situation? You have a lot to not be optimistic about, but do you still have that sense that this is a problem, we're going to tackle it, and why do you feel optimistic?
No, it's just what you said. It is the embodiment of how we are trained. I was trained as an engineer, that there's a solution to every problem. And no matter whether the solution is an engineering problem or a complex world public health problem like COVID-19, I think that level of optimism, especially as President Joe articulated, relative to the research enterprise. And just to go back to what President Jarrell said and relating to why we are optimistic, is that when you fund basic science like mNRA research over many decades, you don't always know where it's headed. And in this instance, because of the fortuitous nature of both NIH and NSF to fund those scholars in that space, we were ready to discover the spike protein that led to the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine. And it required international collaboration and then scaled and targeted funding to develop a vaccine. And in our world, we have never seen a vaccine developed in 9 to 12 months, ever, when required to get the world back to working normally. So again, I'm optimistic just for that. I mean, that is an amazing accomplishment for society, for the entire world, the more than 8 billion people on the planet.
But getting
So,
through these troubles right now, these
yeah,
challenges, are you optimistic
yeah.
about that?
Totally
Okay,
optimistic about even the
good.
troubles and challenges. Hey, look, in every situation, our institutions, there are certain institutions in the world that have stood the test of time. One of them is higher education, religion, and governments, and military. They've all are still here thousands of years later. So my optimism is there for so many reasons. So I'll give you an example. In 2012, you may remember this, there was this new technology in which um, uh, online learning through Coursera,
Hmm.
edX, would change higher education, that residential universities would go away, and that everybody would learn online. Well, that didn't happen, but that was the statement that was being made in 2011 and 2012. So now, fast forward to 2025. Online education is important, virtual education is important, but it's only one part of what we still do. And maybe it's 5 to 10% of what we do. So the institutions, the mission and the value of the engaged and experiential learning opportunity that happens at our institutions, physically and virtually, is still very strong. So here we are now with a change of administration, and yes, some concerns and some uncertainty, significant uncertainty, but I'm still optimistic that as we adapt to the new normal, there's an opportunity for us to reimagine ourselves in research.
Okay.
So what does that mean? So that means that, what we're seeing in this short term, in these last 6 months, 5 or 6 months, the compact, the agreement, the partnership that we've had over all these years with the federal government appears to be evolving and changing. Okay, so we as we always are, again through this sort of optimistic lens and through an engineering lens, we must pivot and become more resilient to the fact that this compact is changing. So there are many models that are going to probably move forward that will allow both UMB and College Park to sustain itself and be more resilient. I don't want to talk about those models because I don't want to give up some of President Jarrell's ideas, number one. And number two, we don't want anybody else to steal our ideas.
Right.
Okay, fair enough.
All right. But more seriously, so for example, let's talk about this. The F&A rate. All right. So actually in the first administration of Trump, President Trump, he had proposed 15%. It got knocked down by Congress, and so we didn't have to wrestle with it. But essentially, the question was the following: why are there different negotiated rates for every institution in the nation. That is a little bit different for every institution in the nation. And what are these facility and administrative costs? And can they be a little bit more transparent in how they're calculated? So if Sturtevant was raising the flag that we don't believe your rates, we think they're inflated, take a look at them. And so now a working group across AAU, American Association for Universities, American Public Land Grant University, APLU, and the American Council of Education and AACU have come together with experts from the government, experts from academia, to propose two new models that could go forward instead of having this reactionary behavior of the federal government saying, I'm going to charge UMB 15%, right? Or College Park 15%. But now we're going to propose a new model to them that actually might suit all of us even a little bit better. And it's actually more robust, more resilient, accurate, less cumbersome, and may actually reduce, may enhance effectiveness and efficiency and be very transparent. But I think the question was just being called, we've never really looked at it in detail. So okay, that was an opportunity for us to propose a new model. So that's where you see that there may be a benefit for us responding to the concerns of a new administration while achieving our mission and our goals.
But that administration politically has got to, at the end of it, be able to say, "Hey, we got to win, right?
Correct. Yes.
We made something happen. We saved
Correct.
money." Uh, so is that going to cut? I mean, ultimately, it is the bottom line for universities, less reimbursement of indirect costs, which means more subsidizing of federal research.
I think it just depends, right? It depends on what works for each institution. I think more importantly, what they're looking for is for us to have some collaboration on what the details of that model and the transparency of what's being costed as facility and administrative costs. I think that was the crux of it. And yes, the administration can have a win because they've caused a pivot of what we do, number one. Number two, it will reduce paperwork if there's only one, two, or three models and not 1,000 models that are out there, right? So even that is a savings. So they are going to win no matter what happens.
Hmm. Bruce, are you optimistic about our situation?
On F&A?
Well, on
Well,
everything. I mean, but well, you can
I,
start with F&A, but
Darryll didn't say it, but in at UMB, there's one person here, maybe two, who really understand how F&A works. And the rest of us always have to go to them and say, what is this about? So I think having a better method is certainly good. And now you need to work out how that is. Obviously, we need to have time. If the model changes and there's expenses shift around, we need to have time to make those shifts. But I don't have any problem with a transparent model. Now, what President Pines didn't say is this model is going to be presented, and we have to have a partner on the other side to be willing to negotiate with us to come up with what seems to be a true cost of research. We used to always figure that even with the current model, we were subsidizing research at a tune of at least 25%. It'd be nice to see that change, but I don't have that expectation. I think we have to be dynamic in this situation. One thing neither of you said about engineers that I'm going to say is we're creatures of trial and error.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I hope all of you out there don't think surgeons are creatures of trial and error, although we got to a certain point by trial and error. So I think when the environment changes, you need to be responsive to that and use your wiles and creativity to come up with better solutions. But the optimism question, I have to say, to me, it goes back to the ninth grade civics class, okay, where we learned about checks and balances, and we learned about the importance of Congress and the courts. And I still believe that. And I still believe in the end that good judgment, good governance will come forward. And if any of you read the most recent judge decision on the termination of grants, it was just wonderful to read her view of here's what a judge does. So I would encourage you all to read that decision. I know you don't read many, and they're hard to read, but that was a particularly nice one. So yeah, I have hope. I have hope because I know there's a lot of solid people in this country who do stand up for what's right. But
Yeah.
anyhow, yes.
No, I wonder, it's great that you have that positive feeling, but I wonder what the global impact on our students is because, we talk a lot about the next generation of researchers and how they're going to potentially be undercut with losing training grants and losing ability to get into grant work. And now we've talked about the international students. I want to relate a story. It has to do with your engineering school. Is like the first public event that I took my infant son to was the 2005 Solar Decathlon
I don't know.
in Washington, D.C. And your colleagues, I mean, you were not running the school yet, but you were teaching there. Your colleagues had, they should have won, by the way, but they had, this was they display these houses of the future, and it was marvelous. It looked like it was floating on water, and it was sustainable, and it just felt good to be in it. And I remember seeing the students and how excited they were that they were creating a vision of the future that could really be not just cool, but useful and helpful and better for the world. Do you think they have that? Are they going to keep that positive, like, I want to be a researcher, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a doctor to because, I can improve the world. Are they going to keep that?
I mean, I think that's part for all of us, not just what's happening in our federal government. Science is still one of the greatest things that happens in our country. And again, we still know that our research institutions and our innovation and economic development ecosystems are the envy of the world. And we're going to have a little hiccup here, as we did during the first administration of President Trump, with the ban on those 19 countries that you referred to. Back then, it was 6 countries, I remember. And we lost some graduate students in that time period, and we dropped down a little bit. But we rebounded really well, and we're able to sort of thwart that challenge. This is a little bit more difficult, I have to say, because you had the on and off revoking of visas, creating uncertainty. You've got now the list of 19 countries. You now have China's on, China's off, China's back on again. So if you can imagine from around the world that graduate students are watching this behavior, and if you're a graduate student, it's likely like I'm not going to apply to a U.S. school because I don't know what's going to happen to me. So I think that's going to hurt us in the short term. I'm not going to deny that. And we're going to have to be able to do a much greater job of graduate recruiting to sustain our program. So that's one part of the challenge. The other part is what we just talked about is the research grants and contracts going down, which contributes to how many students you can support. But the fundamental premise of science and its impact on society and evidence-based work and data is never going to change. And that interest we must continue to instill in our young people and in our people who come to our graduate and undergraduate programs. So I had the fortunate opportunity 2 days ago, and this is where I want to give some optimism as well. I was worried, just like you asked that question, Alex. I was worried that this administration didn't value science, possibly. But fortunately, I had the opportunity to listen to actually three major administration officials. I heard from the director of NIH directly. I heard from the director of the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy, Mr. Michael Kratsios, who basically re-emphasized to all of us, and by the way, this was at an American Public Land Grant University a meeting in which presidents and chancellors listen to what the administrative leaders are, what their priorities are. And Michael Kratsios almost verbatim said, we believe in science, we believe in its enabling ability to enhance the US public good and the economy. And so we care about universities, and we care significantly about universities. So that was very comforting for all of us to hear. It was from a leading official in the administration, the director of Office of Science, Technology, and Policy. And then he further gave the areas of priorities, at least in the STEM areas, that they were interested in. So one of them was in biotech, he mentioned. One of them was in quantum. One of them was in artificial intelligence. And one of them was in advanced manufacturing. And the final one was in energy independence. So that was comforting. So we know that science is highly valued. And that reassures us when we go and communicate that to prospective graduate students, postdocs, and other research scientists that support our institutions and support our mission. So I just wanted to provide that for the community so they know that this is how the administration thinks. And then furthermore, I heard from Dr. Bhattacharya, who's the director of NIH, and he had 5 principles that he articulated as his major vision. And one of them is that the U.S. National Institutes for Health should focus on American chronic disease in Americans, things like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, obesity, things that if we worked on collectively in research, that could truly extend the average life expectancy of an American, which right now is flat over the last 5 years. So I think there's this incredible commitment from the administration to science, to medical science, to science broadly, and that we should take this moment and seize it and just pivot to the foci of interests of the administration.
And who can argue with that? Who can argue with having research in chronic disease? I cheer. I'm very pleased that they say that. Although I will say to you, but also sometimes you're sitting in the chair of a physician and a patient comes to you with a problem that has not a common disease. And those are important too. And I remember when we were doing kidney transplants with a group of older drugs called Imuran and prednisone, and there were some devastating parts of that therapy. It didn't work as well. And then suddenly was the discovery of cyclosporin. And suddenly I had something new to offer. And talk about excitement and talk about how do I improve my care. It was these discoveries that propelled you forward in terms of how you could really move the ball forward. And so, Alex, I think your question about students, I think you should, and I can't address the undergraduates so much, so let me talk about the graduates. From the graduates' point of view, we absolutely have a need to keep our PhD graduate students engaged so that they don't lose heart. And so I'm sure the two of us are focused on that. I think, though, we also need to keep all of our professional students knowing that they're going to be able to serve their mission even better in the future, better medications, better policies in this country, better social services. So those kinds of things are where my focus is. And I don't think our students will lose heart because I think they're here, which is our mission to improve the human condition. And that's a forever kind of concept. But anyhow, not to get too carried away with it.
I wasn't going to ask you this, but you brought up discovery and medical discovery, and a lot of, I know we're talking about domestic causes of chronic disease, but a lot of discovery and a lot of our disease prevention and learning comes from overseas venues, in places like Nigeria and Mali, and we've had such success there. What's going to happen with those efforts?
Well, right now those efforts are on hold, and so the example perhaps you're talking about is a great story where my predecessor, Jay Perman, visited Zambia, and he was in a clinic with a group of Nigerian women who had babies. All of them were HIV positive. And the women say to President Perman, We call these our Maryland babies.
Right.
And the reason they were Maryland babies was because the technology, the science, the clinical trials that went into how do you prevent HIV transmission during pregnancy had actually been developed there. And all of a sudden, they had children without HIV. What a remarkable finding. You can't buy that anywhere. And the fact that that existed in this case, did I say Nigerian before? Zambia.
Yeah, yeah, right.
The fact that it existed in Zambia was a remarkable achievement. So that's the kind of thing that right now that is potentially lost.
And I want to also add, Alex, that, that's a great example of the incredible impact of technologies and science and medical science and delivery of clinical work in country that helps almost project this incredible capacity to help people around the world. But also, our universities, whether it's UMB or College Park, we attract the best and brightest from around the world. We can never really close off the doors to our institutions from the best and brightest from around the world because they provide the diversity of experiences to our students who are domestic and to our faculty who are both international and domestic that helps actually provide greater ideas to these problems that we're trying to solve. So it's important that we never close the doors. And many of these people, probably 80%, stay in our country when they come here. They come for a graduate degree and they stay in our country and create both societal value, economic value, all kinds of public good value. And I'll just give you like three major examples of this, right? That everyone will be able to understand. Of course, I'm going to do it from a STEM perspective and from an engineering perspective. But I'll give you three names. Jensen Wong, his family was born in Taiwan. He immigrated and became an electrical engineer at Oregon State University. And he now is the CEO of the largest engaged AI developer enabling technology in electronics and GPUs called NVIDIA. You all know NVIDIA now. Number two, Sergey Brin. His family immigrated from Russia. His father was a mathematician here, a professor at College Park. Sergey Brin grows up and becomes the co-founder of Google, which you all use every day of your lives, right? Number three, Jeff Bezos, a Cuban immigrant who immigrated to Princeton University and then starts the largest firm in the world, Amazon, which is everywhere and everyone probably on this call has used. So without immigration, education and research, the innovation ecosystem, these entities do not exist in the United States. But because our doors have been open, the best and brightest continue to come. And where do they end up staying? Typically in the United States, and they end up innovating in the United States. This is why it's all tied together. We can never close our doors.
Now, I'm going to shift a little bit because we do have some audience questions. And this may be sensitive, but it's out there. A person writes, can we expect help from the governor and the Maryland legislature? So far, it seems they're acting like business as usual and not recognizing the moment and not understanding the seriousness of the problems we will face.
Well, my answer is that I believe the General Assembly and the governor do understand the severity of both the state situation and the federal situations. Actually, they're tied together in our
Yeah,
region
right.
because I don't know if you all know, but 7% of the workforce in Maryland is federal. And then when you take the contractors, it actually adds up to 21% of the total impact to the state of Maryland's revenue. And so they're tied together. So yes, the state and the General Assembly and the governor's office, they do know, and they have been trying to help us in many ways. And so we are in constant conversation to ensure that they understand our situation, especially from the research enterprises, to make sure that we can continue to be, active in the areas that are of high priority going forward.
Yeah, and let me just add a slightly additional perspective to that. Don't forget the past. They have been highly supportive of higher education. And one of the things, Alex, you wanted to bring up was the strategic partnership. The
Right.
legislature and the governor have been immensely supportive of that partnership with their money and with their support. And we have a lot to show for it. And you mentioned at the beginning the Institute for Healthcare Computing
Right.
down in Montgomery County. Again, the governor and the lieutenant governor and the legislature came forward with hard state dollars to support that kind of program. So yeah, we're on a little rocky time right now. I have I have no doubt we will get through it. We will get through it. But don't forget how tremendously supportive they've been of us in the past. I'll bet you there's a whole lot of universities in other states who wish they had that kind of support.
That's great. The enthusiasm that you have, though, I guess when academics talk about, let me rephrase it, when academics talk about, um, research grants, for instance, I think people hear money. They don't hear as much what you're talking about. Now, I know we talked yesterday, Bruce, about it's an acronym, CRISPR, which is an acronym for a fancy way of mimicking what bacteria often do, right? And they edit our genes, our DNA in ways we don't always like. CRISPR is a way of editing them to fix problems. Talk about that and the promise of that, and how do we get the enthusiasm? How do we explain those things to people so that they can share the enthusiasm for what science can do to improve lives?
Yeah, thank you for that, Alex. But let me begin by saying a grant is not a gift. A grant is a competitive process where you compete for support for your idea. And a group of independent people on a study section say, that's a good idea. And US, it is worth, NIH, it is worth investing in that idea because it has a future. So CRISPR is one of these examples of where for a long period of time, money was invested. Well, let's start with DNA, but eventually this led to CRISPR, which was a way of gene editing. And if you stop and think, what am I talking about? Well, how many of you in the audience know somebody with sickle cell disease or cystic fibrosis or a child with a congenital defect in metabolism? A whole host of different diseases, some of them common diseases, some of them once in a lifetime or very rare. So there was this wonderful story that came out back in May of a child who was born in Philadelphia around October, November with a severe congenital defect. It was a mutation in a gene, and it results in failure of nitrogen metabolism, ammonia metabolism, results in severe brain damage. It is a devastating disease. If you get lucky, a liver transplant will help those patients. But this is a really serious disease. And imagine yourself being the parent of that child being told they've got this disease. And then imagine a researcher who walks into the room and says, we've been working on this new method for years. We think it's ready for human use. We can tailor a gene editing for your child's specific thing, and we think it'll work. And so, to make a long story short, that did happen with all the appropriate approvals, FDA approvals, et cetera. It took a child who was devastated by this disease. It's now 6 or 7 months since he had that first treatment. He's back to normal. Now, you don't call it a cure until many years, but wow, what a remarkable recovery. And that's a direct effect of a group of smart people coming up with an idea, competing for funding, in the end, saving a life and getting a Nobel Prize. Okay, I'd like to be there, and I'll bet you everyone on this call, if you had a child like that, you would be so thankful. That's a miracle. And I have to say, I never thought in my lifetime I would really see that happen here's a great example. NIH funding.
Darryll, you were talking about I'm trying to be mindful of time. You were talking about what's going on with F&A costs. Aaron Mansfield wants to follow up and ask a little bit more about what's going on with that. Aaron, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah. So, this is something that when I talk to researchers, they really panic about. But when obviously I try to see things from multiple perspectives, and I was wondering, do you feel as a university president, there might be places that you can lower your overhead in order to find common ground with the Trump administration? And, will you be successful at that?
So Aaron, thank you for the question and thank you for your interest in this discussion on the F&A rates. So if all of the universities were to tell you that our typical F&A rate, which has been negotiated with NIH and NSF, is for College Park is something like 56.8%. But if I told you that across all grants and contracts, that believe it or not, are because of NSF always says to us, hey, can you do it for 30% F&A rate? And when we get grants from the state, it's typically at one half the F&A rate. Where across all grants and contracts at College Park, the effective F&A rate is probably in the mid 30s percentage wise. So even with not the administration asking for nothing, we know that we never get full F&A rate anyway. All right, so that's the first thing I wanted you to know. Second thing is that we now have been looking at our F&A rates and we realize there are things that can go into direct costs that we never put into direct costs. And all the universities have been doing all of this analysis to unpack the details of their F&A rates. So we think that the two models, and there's a third model that is now emerging, there's a simple model and there's a more detailed model that are really, I think, good for schools of medicine, which I'm sure President Jarrell can attest to. And then there's a hybrid model between the Model 1 and Model 2. Now, we've been having these conversations with the highest people in the Office of Science and Technology and Policy, in the White House, who have been very proponents of a change in the F&A rates. And we've been having them with the appropriate House and Senate committees. So we've been very transparent. But what we do need from the academic community is a consensus on these models going forward, and that they do believe that it will allow them to address all of their F&A rates. And I believe many of them have already done their calculations like what we have, and it will allow us to come in alignment since we already know our effective F&A rate is somewhere in the mid 30s.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So we mentioned strategic partnership, which isn't just Empower, as you've pointed out. It's all the things we're working on together. One of the big projects that we unveiled this year was the Center for Translational Engineering and Medicine, bringing the doctors together with the bioengineers. I'm going to bring in Greg Bowden because it speaks to a larger issue of support by philanthropic means. Greg is our head of philanthropy. Greg, you there?
I am here unexpectedly. I hope
Well,
you
I thought your point was a good one, and maybe you could tell us more about the role, because we've talked about alternative means of financing. And of course, there's no way that philanthropy can replace the support of the federal government. It can play a big role, and in the case of CTAM, it's a very big role, right?
Yeah, and I think the philanthropy from Edward and Jennifer St. John and the St. John Foundation demonstrates that point, that it can have a significant impact just on its own, just in its absolute value, but it has a leveraged value beyond that in the spotlight that it puts on this work and in our ability to then sort of go out with proof of concept to other potential funders, maybe including the government. So, but I would love to hear from the two presidents sort of how they see philanthropy in the mix.
Great.
Well, philanthropy is always good to have, Greg. I would actually back up the question and remind people that that center would not have occurred if we didn't have a strategic partnership. That center would not have occurred if we didn't have funding in the strategic partnership that the council could contribute to making this possible. And then that couldn't have occurred unless College Park and UMB were able to sit down with the St. John Foundation, both universities who have a relationship with, but instead of saying no, I want it, no, I want it, to say, Mr. St. John, we would like to do this kind of thing. So again, the power of partnership. I do see philanthropy as important, and it enabled this, but it by itself didn't enable it. There were other pieces that came into play to make it happen. Darryll, would you add anything to that?
Absolutely. So, Greg, first of all, Greg, thank you for your leadership on securing the gift, along with Jim Harris from College Park. And it was the first time the two institutions went together on an opportunity with a donor, Mr. Ed St. John, to do something significant related to a center that would be co-located in the city of Baltimore in a brand new building that you guys were building. And it's a really great opportunity because we have been talking about co-locating medicine and engineering for many, many years, probably almost a decade. And this was an enabler. And yes, it did put a spotlight on this collaboration for a Center on Translational Engineering and Medicine. But as President Jarrell suggested, if it wasn't because of the Empower relationship, which was codified in state law, that it also wouldn't be possible.
Right.
It also wouldn't be possible if the two institutions beyond the Empower monies were not committing additional resources. It wouldn't be possible. And it also takes the leadership of the faculty of the School of Medicine and the faculty of bioengineering. So this is a great opportunity. It's very exciting for all of us. And this is where, this was not done from a federal perspective. This was done from purely a state perspective, two institutions and leadership and obviously philanthropy. So now, with that said, I do want to say that philanthropy going forward plays a significant role in the new emerging models for research. I happen to chair something called, for the National Academies, the Government University Industry Philanthropy Research Roundtable, which is called GWIPR. And this new philanthropic dollars for research is a new and growing emerging area. And so we must also not use it to leverage and put a spotlight on the work, but actually to be a priority in doing the work itself. And so this is the new opportunity and the new blue ocean that we're all going to be swimming in as monies in the federal government may go down over the next couple of years.
But one thing to not also be missed here, we're all talking about research, but there's an educational component to this too. Yes, of course, there's graduate students from both institutions participating, but there's now also going to be two new joint educational programs. One of them is a linked program of a Bachelor of Science in Engineering and then MD. And then there's a second program where an MD also gets a Master's in Engineering and becomes what others have called physician engineers or physicianeers, or whatever you would like to call it. But people who attack the world problems through the eyes of both physician and engineering. That's a positive step forward.
What's really positive too, the two co-leaders of that, Doctors Saidi and Scarcelli, uh, they are thick as thieves. They obviously like working together. They learn from each other. They're working on a way of using the way light scatters inside the dense material in your eye and how that can be used to determine the density so that in certain procedures maybe people won't suffer vision loss. I mean, so there's a real world benefit people can understand. We're talking about people losing their sight, but seeing those two work together uh, gives me a lot of hope, and it sort of reminds me of the two of you, and hopefully, that relationship wears off on people. They're inspired by that. Any final words, since we're about out of time, for how we go forward together to make this to work to get through to the other side?
Well,
Good.
another thing that President Pines and I did was establish the Empower Professors. We have 27 of them now, and these are individuals who are committed to cross-campus interactions, and got this award because they've already demonstrated that. So that's the kind of thing that I think leads to closer integration. The same is happening with our scholars, our students
Mhm.
who go back and forth between the institutions. So the more back and forth we have, particularly with students,
Well,
I
we
think
have a new BS to MD program, right? We've
that's
just
right.
announced,
That's
right?
right.
Awesome.
That'll make us better.
Yep. Dr. Pines, any final words?
No, I would just say that, this is a really coveted partnership between UMB and UMCP. And and it has led to already some really incredible large initiatives. And I believe it's the wave of the future to really have strategic partnerships that will lead to new research models that will be able to fund the great work that our scientists do every day on behalf of the citizens of the state of Maryland.
I'm just going to ask, are we going to get some way involvement in quantum, the
Absolutely.
capital of
Of course
quantum,
you
because
are.
that's
Of
very
course.
exciting.
It is.
Yeah.
But I could spend another hour talking about
I,
quantum.
I know you could. I know you could. Yeah. Well, I just had to put that plug in there. Well, thank you.
Yes, yes.
Thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time, and I know you both are very, very busy. And thanks to everybody for taking a moment to keep. We'll try to keep updating you on what's going on and how we're getting through these things. I'm sure we will.
Thank you for
All right.
all being there in the
Take care.
audience.
All right.
Appreciate it.
See ya.
All
Bye.
right.
Bye bye.